Anakin Skywalker's role in the Ahsoka show is nothing short of amazing, but it's left a number of questions. Settling this, it's time to look back on episode 5 now the season's over, and get into all the hidden meanings from his training session with Ahsoka, and there's definitely more than one.
I'm here to finish your training.
But I will say they're not all obvious, even on the first few viewings.
Tell me what's going on.
We'll start off by going through the lesson, getting into the hidden meanings, and looking at how it's changed Ahsoka for the better, because there's far more to it than Ahsoka just being a little more positive and a little more smiley in the final couple of episodes. Now, to really understand the approach Anakin was taking in this training session, we first need to understand just what actually led Ahsoka to this moment. And one of the biggest complaints fans had in the first half of this season was actually with Ahsoka herself, believing she lacked any real emotion, a stark contrast to the Ahsoka we've seen in animation, who was very passionate, caring, and open to others. And this actually led some fans to believe it was due to Rosario Dawson's portrayal of the character. And it's become a lot clearer now that this was actually written for the character, and Rosario Dawson was instructed to behave differently at the start of the show than she would towards the end of the show, allowing us to clearly see the transformation the character has went through over the course of the 8 episodes. But the reason our live action version of Ahsoka up until episode 5 was so different to the version we've seen previously in animation was because of the past chipping away at her. The trials that she had gone through in the Clone Wars, in the Rebellion, had all began to eat away at the very foundation of what made this character so special. But there is one past event in particular that had more of a toll on her than any of the others, and that was Anakin's turn to the dark side. Now, the way Ahsoka responded to finding out Anakin fell and became Darth Vader was to analyse what went wrong for him so she could avoid making the same mistakes herself and passing on that knowledge to a Padawan. Now, I will say there are multiple ways that one can lose their way and fall to the dark side. However, it just so happens that Anakin fell in a typical series of events that the Jedi have long taught younglings to be careful of over the years, and Ahsoka, being trained during the prequel trilogy, would have received these teachings too. And it's exactly this training she received when she was a part of the Jedi Order, and seeing it happen firsthand to her master, the Jedi that she looked up to more than any other, that subconsciously caused her to behave more like a prequel trilogy Jedi than ever before, which is certainly something Anakin himself didn't train her to do. And it was these newfound beliefs that prevented her from training Grogu due to his attachment with Din Djarin, and it also placed restraints on the extent that she was willing to train Sabine Wren after what happened to her family on Mandalore, and this caused a friction between the pair, which resulted in Ahsoka effectively running around in the period after Rebels, trying to do the right thing around the galaxy but lacking any real drive, or what Anakin actually says in this training sequence, conviction. Now, along comes Baylan, who has the ability to peer into her mind, and he takes full advantage of this by playing on her emotions regarding her old master. And although Ahsoka had the desire to do right and prevent Thrawn's return, she's ultimately empty. She's a shell of her former self, and she's lacking any true purpose and inner strength to continue fighting, and that's how Baylan defeats her. And it's at this moment that Anakin establishes a spiritual connection with her within the world between worlds, or what looks to be the world between worlds. Now, the title of Anakin's lesson was Live or Die, but what does that mean exactly? Let's break it down to understand the true extent of what Anakin's actually teaching Ahsoka in this moment. Now, the first lesson that could be taken away here is for Ahsoka to be her old self. Now, as I mentioned earlier, many thought she was emotionless because of Rosario Dawson, but that wasn't true. And her old self would have continued fighting. She wouldn't have lost to Baylan in that manner. Let's not forget, she defeated Darth Maul, who I believe is probably more powerful than Baylan. Now, it's all well and good Ahsoka going back to what we could call her roots and acting like a version of herself that was a lot closer to what Anakin trained her to be, but she had to understand her part in the story as well. She had to realise her legacy. Up until this point, she had herself down as just simply being a warrior. That's what Anakin trained her to be, believing that her legacy is going to be like her master's. But Anakin's here to show her that her legacy is more than war and death, and it's completely up to her to achieve her potential. She can be something more, but she has to choose to be, and yes, it may result in her needing to fight in the process. He's here to tell her that her legacy's not been written, that it's ever changing. And whilst the overall lesson focuses on what Ahsoka can achieve, it also focuses on what Ahsoka can pass on. And that goes hand in hand with her ability to actually embrace attachment and emotions. Now, Anakin needed to remind Ahsoka, who up until now in the show was thinking of the greater good and not much else, and this can be demonstrated when she's willing to allow Ezra to stay in exile just to prevent Thrawn returning to the known galaxy. Now, Anakin shows Ahsoka that it's important to fight for those close to you as well, not just for the greater good. And this can be demonstrated in Sabine, her Padawan, giving the map to Baylan. She wasn't betraying Ahsoka in this moment, but she was showing how powerful and important relationships are, just like her connection to Ezra. Now, this is not the Jedi way, but Anakin never really trained Ahsoka to be your typical Jedi. And just like Hu Yang says, she comes from a long line of untraditional Jedi, but it's also important for her to realise that she isn't destined to become Anakin. Just because she knew everything that he knew, it doesn't mean they're going to follow the same path. And just as Ahsoka feared her legacy of war, suffering and death, which we saw in the Clone Wars flashback, similar fears also fueled Anakin's turn to the dark side. He tried to hide them to prevent his fears becoming real, and Ahsoka is falling into the same trap. Ahsoka should have attachments and emotions, and she should continue to demonstrate that, but she needs to find a balance. She can't let them take over. And the final main lesson you can take from this training session is what I would call the Vader lesson. Now, Ahsoka felt great guilt and fear over her believed role in Anakin turning to the dark side, believing that her leaving the Jedi Order and turning her back on Anakin somehow led to his downfall. Ahsoka was allowing her past to define her future ever since she discovered Anakin become Darth Vader, and she feared to train anyone, especially if they had any kind of attachment, because she was afraid that she would ultimately go on to fail them, and for all she knew, her Padawan that she's training could then go on to become another Darth Vader. But she's not just fearful for her Padawan, she's also fearful for herself, because these same emotions could also have the same effect on her. So Ahsoka tries to close herself off from her friends from other relationships, as she's equally as afraid to get close to anyone. Now, it is possible that she didn't know the extent of Anakin's feelings and his situation with Padme, and therefore she may have come to the conclusion that it actually takes very little to fall to the dark side. But this fear that she has around Vader and the lessons she's learnt from his fall is also holding back her true potential to do good and to pass on what she had learned to others for generations to follow. Now, in my opinion, Anakin needed to show Ahsoka how her past had turned her into something she's not. She had actually become the Shadow Warrior that the episode's title refers to. Anakin's fall and Vader's rise was holding her back. That's why Anakin portrayed both sides of himself against Ahsoka, allowing her to fight them. Vader gave her the opportunity to defeat him, the same opportunity that Luke had in Return of the Jedi, and she, like his son, chose the light, chose not to kill Vader, but instead to let go. This was her moving on. This was Ahsoka choosing to live. Now, a lot of people were talking about Ahsoka's character being plain, dull and boring in the first half of the season. As I say, this was intentional. It's to show where Ahsoka was as a character prior to Anakin completing her training. Anakin has helped her understand the importance of her emotions, her feelings, whilst also bringing her to the realization that her destiny is up to her to decide. It's not written, and yes, she may have to fight. There will be casualties, just like in the Clone Wars. And as much as you'd like to prevent that, sometimes you just can't. Now, these lessons bring Ahsoka more in line with the person she used to be whilst training under Anakin as a Padawan, teachings that over the years she'd suppressed, but now they've returned. Guys, let me know your interpretation of Anakin's training session with Ahsoka. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed it. I'll catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you.